Let's get into the headlines. A study published this week in Science, a prestigious scientific journal, found that an AI model correctly identified the diagnosis of 67% of real emergency room cases at a Boston hospital, compared to 55 and 50% for two attending physicians. The researchers used 76 actual patient records with zero modifications, and no AI company funded this work. Independent, in other words. The researchers stopped well short of recommending clinical deployment, instead calling for formal trials. Michael, if AI is already outperforming doctors in peer-reviewed studies using real patients and real records, what is the actual argument for not at least putting it in the room as a second opinion?
This is a very interesting one, right? Because one of my great hopes with AI, and I think OpenAI has taken this approach, is that medicine is ripe for AI to come in and improve diagnoses. Now, can it improve outcomes? That's where everybody's going to, right? And I think one of the interesting things here, because my wife is a doctor, is that ER doctors, I don't know if you know anything about it, but they're always on call. They're always tired, right? And if you're always on call and you're always tired, can you keep up with the latest literature? I think you know where I'm going. AI can. So whenever you're looking at any particular patient, AI can potentially look at the DNA of that particular patient, measure it against all other outcomes that have ever existed, measure it against all the literature. Can a doctor do that on the fly, tired, under pressure? That's the question. Now, I know a lot of people will say, I would never trust AI with my heart. But on the other side, if it keeps advancing at this pace, you might have a special heart defect that a regular ER doctor has never heard of. So think of AI as like the special Dr. House, right? Like
Right.
this AI is house on fire and has the whole world's knowledge at its fingertips. And then you can think of the possibilities. I'm not saying it's there yet. The researchers obviously hedged, but that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
That points to a direction maybe the LLMs are not. It points to a direction maybe social media and AI, it's just simply not pointing to, where people are a little bit skeptical about data and privacy, etc. But you know where my mind went with this is education. Maybe the problem is that these doctors haven't seen enough volume to get to the proper diagnoses. Like an analogy in strategy and consulting, and innovation or VC, venture capital, you get better over time at pattern matching because you just seen many more patterns. You start to pattern match based on volume. That can be dangerous, but it also gives you a quick heuristic to say, this is what I think I'm seeing. But AI has a special advantage over the VC and the consultant. It can dig deeper into the world's knowledge on the fly. I can't do that as a VC. I can only look at the 400 examples I've seen in corporate and beyond, but I can't look at the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of examples at the same time. So that's very powerful if you can harness it in the right way. And what it tells me is the threat may not be to the ER room. It may actually help the ER room. The threat might actually be to medical education. Are we preparing doctors in the right way? That might be the ideal place to place AI. That's my point.
A couple interesting points on this study that I found. The AI scored exceptionally even better on management reasoning, which is what comes after initial diagnosis. That's the tests that are ordered, antibiotics that are ordered, that type of thing. The next steps. It did very well. It did 89% compared to 34% for doctors using Google level tech, not AI. So that was interesting. But there were some counterpoints here. The test didn't allow the humans. The humans were working off the files just like the AI was. Now, in real world situations, humans are in the room with the patients, they can see things like skin discoloration, overall temperament, pain, that type of thing. And secondly, these were internal medicine attending physicians, very talented and skilled people, but not emergency, or I said technicians, physicians, but not emergency physicians. So they weren't actually trained in emergency.
Which are the highest paid. They're the highest paid for a good reason.
Yeah. I mean, that's very high stress and very high intensity. And I'm sure a bunch of training.
It's kind of like professional. It's kind of like professional athletes.
Yeah.
Right. So the people that make it into the ER and thrive are like the highest of the highest level in professional athletics. If you make it to the ER and you're high paid, you're LeBron James of medicine. Just think of it that way.
I always thought of it as like, that sounds like a terrible job, like that you must not pay very well. Like the people aren't.
No. I think if you look across most high paying jobs, they carry high risk, right? And ER is one of those. You can look it up on the fly, and you could probably look it up by organ. Brain surgeons, heart surgeons are going to be at the top.
Yeah, they are.
And why? Because it's high risk on the fly. Now, they don't have an arena watching them, so yeah, they're not paid properly like LeBron James. But yeah, I think the analogy holds that the skills you need at that level are so high. You're getting paid a lot, so there's a lot of competition to come in there. So the question is, and this is the position I would always like to take with AI, how can AI help them? Under stress, tired, right? Operating on essential organs in the human body.
Yeah.
That's the way I think you should think about the best ways to deploy AI, right?
Yeah. Well, I absolutely think it needs to be adopted in many ways in medicine, especially when it comes to understanding DNA, RNA, genetic codes, stuff that can fix and cure diseases or conditions. That type of stuff is going to do just fantastic well, just because the amount of data is too big for humans. Okay, let's turn now to Apple. They're expected to announce at its developer conference next month that the next version of iOS 27, I believe, will allow users to choose which AI model powers Siri and other system-wide features. With Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT all in the running. This is a significant departure for Apple, which has built its entire competitive advantage on keeping its ecosystem closed and controlled, even down to the charge ports. Apple has made it clear it will not be responsible for those third-party models, what they say or do. Michael, is it a brilliant strategic play, or is it a sign that Apple is falling behind in a way that actually matters?
So we talked about this on a previous episode, and some commenters, listeners disagreed with us. And the point that we were making was Apple owns the channel.
Yeah.
Apple owns the customer. And the criticism we got was Apple should be actually developing its own AI. And we said, but why? Why should it do that if it owns the customer? Why not treat the foundation labs, the different models, as suppliers? Right? You need our customers. We don't need to spend capital on developing AI. You're just a supplier for us with the different models, be it Gemini, Anthropic with Claude, or OpenAI, or the open models. That's just smart. Why is that smart? That's smart because dual sourcing, triple sourcing, quadruple sourcing suppliers does what? It lowers the price of the supply because you have to compete for my customers. That's a very smart strategic approach. And I think there are already signs. We talked last week about Elon, the suit against Sam Altman, and then how Microsoft was playing a role in that. And I think it's very clear Microsoft is going to make a similar move. Why? Because being beholden to one foundation lab is a risk. If it were winner take all, it makes sense to ally yourself with the winner take all like OpenAI. It looked like that very early. But now, Anthropic's coming, rushing at the gates, right? Entering enterprise at unprecedented rates, winning enterprise customers. Why would you hold yourself with just one model? Why? Why be dedicated to one model? You could use all of them. And I told you, like our model, where we're trying to enter enterprise for better strategic reasoning, we use Claude, but we run into customers all the time who only use one of the other models. And I think this is just logical that if you're sitting where you own the channels, just make it triple, quadruple open source, right? Where you have multiple suppliers competing for your customers, and then you hold pricing power in the end. You
Yeah.
have leverage over you hold buyer power, if you use Michael Porter's old language, over those suppliers. So I think it makes a hell of a lot of sense what they're doing. And the question would be, will Microsoft follow suit? Probably. It it makes sense strategically to do so. And I don't think it contradicts Apple's model. Apple has always not been responsible for third-party dev applications, right? I mean, this is their model. They open it up to you on the App Store, and then it's your responsibility to meet their standards. So I don't think it's a contradiction at all.
You kind of alluded to this, but even though Apple isn't responsible for what these models will say or do, they are responsible for probably some percentage of those AI subscriptions that are bought through the App Store go back to Apple. So that's kind of the race right now in AI. It's not necessarily to get to AGI exactly. It is to become the thing that is the next App Store. Because if you control the App Store, you get a piece of everybody's pie. It's huge. It's a big deal. So I don't know. That was very interesting there. There's also an agreement with Gemini or with Google right now where Gemini will power native Siri features, meaning some users may be routed to Gemini even without selecting it. And then we also don't know if these models will have as much access to your personal information on the phone like Apple Intelligence does. I'm not an Apple user, so I don't know exactly that, but I assume it can access your calendar and your contacts, that type of thing. So I don't know. It's unclear.
If you allow it, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's unclear
it's
if
unclear.
it'll have that function. All right, let's move forward to Amazon, who announced this week it's opening its entire logistics operation, including freight, fulfillment, distribution, and last mile delivery to any business in the country. UPS dropped 10% and FedEx dropped 9% on this news. Amazon's VP compared this launch directly to the founding of AWS, which turned internal cloud infrastructure into a business worth more than $100 billion a year. Amazon has now run this exact playbook twice: build internal capability, weaponize it as a product, and then crater an existing industry. Mike, at what point does every large company have to start asking whether it's core operations or Amazon's next product or not?
Well, I think this is a very logical move. I go very deeply into this in my book, where I talk about when you want to do business model innovation and you want to go away from your core business, the way that you would do that, we talked about that with Scott Newton about why Kodak failed and Fujifilm thrived. It was because Fujifilm went to the heart of their capabilities, which was chemicals. And then they were able to pivot. And when you look at Amazon, when you think about why are they able to do this, and these may be the two major capabilities that they have, and you may not need to fear anything else. But the things that they need to do really well for their core business, their retail business, is the back end. They need to do the back end really well to match suppliers with buyers in the long tail and this two-sided, multi-sided market, right? They need to be really, really damn good at that for that to work. That's AWS. And the AWS bet was simply, we are much better at that than you are, rest of the market. Now others will catch up, but they had a core capability in their business that they could apply in other spaces. And Bezos was smart enough, and their current leadership was smart enough to separate those. Now, the core business can still benefit from that AWS capability. But another capability, which I hinted at, was think about the user experience when you go into Amazon. From the very beginning, if you click on something, aside from their algorithmic capabilities, which can discover all your weirdness, right? Like you ordered this, you might be interested in this other weird shit, right? So, but once you click on it, it goes into your cart, right? And once it goes into the cart, automatically it's matching vendors and logistics with how long it takes to get to you. That's a very, very interesting capability, right? And I've said this, and I said it in my book before this news even came out. If you wanted to predict where Amazon might disrupt other businesses, I would not want to be Ryder. I would not want to be U-Haul or any other logistics companies, and maybe even Cisco, because now Amazon went into Whole Foods. So they have an elite supply chain and logistics capability that was obviously so good that at some point they might say, who are we better than? Who could we share this with? And this is called make or buy, right? Are you familiar with make or buy?
No, tell
What it
me.
means? Make or buy means when you're another company, besides Amazon in this case, you have the decision to create your own logistics and supply chain and deliver on it. And you may not be good at that. And you may not have the scale. Or you could buy it from somebody who has that. They're just better at that than you. And although you have to pay a third party, their scale is so much better that it might be cheaper to buy it from a third party than to deliver it on your own because you have to build it, maintain it, etc.
Makes
That's
sense.
what make or buy means. So you either make it yourself, that includes the learning costs, etc., or you buy it from somebody who's just better at it than you. Most of the world works that way. That's how supply chains work, value chains work. You outsource when it makes sense, you insource when it makes sense. If it's strategically critical, you might keep it indoors. But one of the things I was thinking along the way was, hey, who else is really good at logistics? And would they possibly enter this space? And people love to bash on Walmart. But if you think about anybody who has an elite supply chain and logistics capability, it's them. And it's also Amazon. And what you wonder is, why has Walmart not done that? And then strategically, as a strategist, you might say, well, is Amazon doing too much now? Are these too many businesses to cover? Will they be able to maintain their retail, AWS, and supply chain at the same time and logistics? That's unclear. But what is really interesting about Amazon, it's one of the very few companies, aside from Fujifilm, which I decided, that's able to take its core capabilities and create new business models. And that's really interesting because most companies cannot do that. They barely understand what they're good at in the first place.
A couple interesting things here is that Amazon still has a deal with USPS that ends October of 26. They're going to remain at 80% of volume until then. I do want to do a callback to, well, not a callback because we haven't talked about it before, but there's an older article in the Wall Street Journal and an op-ed that labeled it a $1.46 subsidy per Amazon package that the USPS was paying because they charged such low rates to Amazon for the bulk. So that's been there. So Amazon has used the USPS to subsidize its package delivery for a very long time while it's now launching its own capabilities. Interesting turn of events.
Okay, one comment, because we're going to talk a lot about government in this episode. That is not Amazon's fault.
No, I agree.
Do not write subsidies in that fashion or laws in that fashion that private businesses can take advantage of it.
No, I agree. So another point here is Procter & Gamble is one of the first customers to be using this.
Yeah,
They're a
that's a
very
good point.
big competitor with Amazon. They have a lot of the same CPG market, consumer packaged goods. And Amazon has a history, not necessarily them as a company, but employees. They have a lot of employees who don't act correctly all the time with data. For instance, we've had instances where Amazon has used marketplace seller data to build competing products with people selling a lot on the marketplace. We've
White
had
labels.
FTC alleged Amazon, they held onto children's voice and geolocation data indefinitely from Alexa interactions when they weren't supposed to. And then we had an incident of a Ring employee who viewed thousands of recordings belonging to female users at one point in time. And some of those are the company, some of those are just rogue employees. But Procter and Gamble, for instance, because they're such a direct competitor, having all of their logistics and essentially their map of how they do business in Amazon's hands poses an interesting question. Now, they have that problem with anybody who does their logistics, but Amazon's a competitor because they make a lot of the same products. It's just an interesting
Well, I think
relationship.
Procter and Gamble is one of the best, how do you say it? They're one of the best examples. There are two concepts in branding. One is a branded house, and one is a house of brands. Nestle is a branded house. Everything has Nestle's name on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are benefits to that and negatives to that. There are trade-offs. P&G has its tentacles literally everywhere. But you don't know it because they're a house of brands. P&G underlies all those brands. And what's interesting, and why I even came to Walmart, is because Walmart buys a hell of a lot of P&G's products.
Yeah.
So there's that competition too. Walmart is a retail competitor of Amazon. So what does that mean? And this is always a danger. Let's harken back to Apple. We just talked about them. If you depend on someone who owns the channel, who owns the customers, there's always the risk they can copy your branded product and white label it or private label it, which simply means copy it and produce a cheaper version.
Yeah.
It's just a trade-off. I don't have a good answer. One of the things you could ask yourself as a consumer is, which is better for consumers? I'm not going to answer that. You have to think for yourself. But this is the dilemma of these massive brands when the channels are changing right now. And AI is causing a lot of that.
Let's move on now to Nvidia, who announced this week it's investing $500 million in Corning, the American glassmaker best known for making screens on your iPhones, to expand optical fiber manufacturing by 10x. Corning stock jumped 14% on this announcement. Corning is planning a 10x expansion, Mike, of its optical connectivity capacity. How does a company justify a bet of that magnitude?
What is the best way to pipe this information? Is it through copper? Is it through fiber? What is it? And it's interesting. That is a very difficult space, materials, for any startup to ever enter. Because you think Corning, I think it's Owen Corning, if you look at it, right? Very traditional company. I think they're even into insulation and fibers and maybe even asbestos. You can look that up, edit it out if you need to, right? But that's interesting, right? It's not just the data that's out there, right? That's hard enough to produce and compute. It's the pipes. That's infrastructure. So I think as the problem of compute grows ever more severe, the question is, what is the extra infrastructure that you're going to need? And infrastructure never sounds to me like startup. That sounds to me like massive capital investments that probably older companies own or governments need to invest massively in. But you know much more about telecommunications than I do.
I think it's it's a safe bet for them. They've got all this revenue agreement in place that it's going to be paid for, at least for the next 4 to 5 years. It'll be paid for completely. The 10x increase. That's a lot. That's a big sum. My old company I used to work for had an agreement with Corning for the past 2 years they were buying 10% of all Corning's production of fiber. And that's
Yeah.
because that's to help with AI infrastructure, because telecom companies build the fiber into those buildings, and then the companies, whether it's Google talking to itself or other companies coming into the data center, they buy pathways into the data center through the telecom providers, AT&T, Verizon, Lumen, etc. So there's been a big demand for fiber from telecom from a infrastructure route. We're also upgrading our Metro Ethernet loops to 3.0, which is now going to be capable of 400 gigs, where we're currently in 2.0 metro areas can only do 100 gig. So there's a lot of things going on where we're upgrading essentially the internet backbone right now to 400 gig from 100 gigs.
Yeah.
Essentially what's happening. So that's happening already. And then we got the AI data center infrastructure build on top of that. So fiber production, Corning isn't the only player, but they're one of the few players. So that production is extremely valuable. And for them to 10x it is crazy, but it's there. So what I read about this that I didn't realize is that, of course, inside of GPUs and processors are a lot of copper connections. And what we're talking about here is because of the way that Nvidia does, it'll have 100 Nvidia AI GPUs inside of a unit, and they all have to be connected together. On a personal computer, it'd be what's called an SLI bridge, essentially. These are all SLI together, and it's done through copper today, but they're going to change that to fiber optic. It's crazy. It's going to reduce the heat generated, which is going to reduce the power consumption. So it's just going to be a big step forward in our efficiency quotient on AI compute. I think it's really cool. Really cool.
Well, it's one of the things in innovation you always have to look at is if there are barriers somewhere, there's the opportunity to create substitutes somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's just the way the world works. And comes to geopolitics, there's this idiocy that if you own one resource, that you will dominate the world. And well, if you try, there's then the incentive, the counter incentive to create substitutes. And it happens again and again and again. And well, politicians have a tendency to not learn very fast, right? But markets do learn. They learn very fast because people win and lose money at scale trying to answer these questions. And I think this is a very good example, like a traditional industry, a traditional company like Corning can benefit massively from shifts in the market, right?
That's why we're having a race for who owns all the moon rocks right now, essentially, with China. It's not really said that way, but it's what it is. All right, Anthropic now. They're the company behind Claude, if you're not familiar, is reportedly finalizing a funding round that would raise $50 billion and value the company at $900 billion, putting it ahead of OpenAI for the first time. For context, Anthropic was valued at $61 billion just 14 months ago. If you formed your prior on who won the AI race in 2022 and never updated it, Anthropic's valuation this week is a significant correction. What does it say about business strategy, Mike, when the quieter company, the one that shows enterprise customers over consumer downloads, ends up the more valuable one?
It tells you why this show is called Show Your Priors. It tells you that in geopolitics and business and the environment in general, markets, etc., they move so damn fast. If you're beholden to a prior, you better be willing to update it. And here's a good example. Are Anthropic and OpenAI doing the same thing? And this goes back to classical strategy. What you would call OpenAI is a B2C business because that's how they grew. They grew in B2C very fast, very successfully. And it looked like, I think for most people, winner take all. But it turns out, when you offer it for free and you don't check who's willing to pay, and a lot of their users are not, they were already complaining when they released ads. That was already beyond the pale for a lot of users. And then Anthropic comes along out of their own team, actually, and this is typical in business. They come up with a different theory, and they come into enterprise. Enterprise is B2B. That's a very different game with very different revenue profiles. So OpenAI started with massive volume and basically a freemium business model. It's free to use, and if you want to upgrade to more capacity, more queries, whatever you want to call it, more compute is actually what's behind it. You have to upgrade and pay more. B2B is a different game. It's not as easy to acquire customers, but once you do, the revenue profile is much different. Per customer, the revenue is much more. The margin is much more because you're not dealing with freemium. You don't even start freemium, you start already in a premium game. So I think that's what you have to think about when you look at these two companies. They've chosen, whether consciously or not, two very different roads to market. And that's something you always need to keep in your mind when you're comparing AI companies, especially the LLMs. They are segmenting right now. And those segments determine what strategies are available, what business models are available, what pricing power is available, and why Anthropic's valuation is rising so fast because they're going deeply into enterprise to be checked by the way, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, because they own the channels, right? So that's the question. How will Anthropic deal with that? But I think this is a very interesting experiment we're seeing live is a B2C model, OpenAI, versus a B2B model. Which will be more successful over the long term? We don't know at all. I'll just say that. That's the prior I have. And will OpenAI choose to pivot to B2B? Can they now, or is it too late? Will Claude abandon B2C? Like, I don't care about you, just users out there, coders, indies, whatever. That's not for me. I'm here for the big conglomerates, the big corporates. That's what we're here for. So this is a very interesting case, and it's clear to me why Anthropic caught up, but I don't think it's a race that's already run. It's just we got to look. These are different models now. It took a little time to get there, but they're different business models completely, different go to market.
This will put them in SpaceX territory. SpaceX was probably going to IPO between 1.2 and 1.5 trillion. This is going to put them right up there next to them. Yeah, this should be their last funding round. OpenAI's was, I think, 852 on their last one, and that was probably their last funding round as well. So interesting how things have kind of shifted here at the end, especially after Anthropic getting blacklisted by the government, which we'll talk about that here in a bit. All right, this one should be up your alley, Mike. Researchers at EPFL just built a new benchmark and found that AI models routinely hallucinate their sources, citing real articles. I want to make a statement here because when I was researching this story with Claude, I had Claude summarize the paper for me, and I read everything in his summary and started asking it questions, and then asking for dates and other sources to back that up, etc., and found that Claude told me a completely wrong article.
Bullshit.
It came back with an article from 2025 is May, and it was an article about giving AI subtle hints and then asking it, and AI would lie to you and tell you something different about how it didn't use the hint. And that was the article it gave me versus the article that it's actually about here. I finally got Claude to read it. I actually read it. Very interesting. But Mike, let's just pass it over to you. What do you think about hallucination here with sources, which this study was actually about?
I always go back to the causes.
Yeah.
And I'll always do that. This is a probabilistic machine, and it's a black box. The people running this don't exactly understand why it behaves like it does. And a lot of it has to do with neural networks and being probabilistic. Stochastic is the bigger academic word you want to say. I knew that when I came into using these machines, and I was naive when I started using it. And through lots of pain, building my own applications, did I learn this machine has a very great tendency to lie to you. And again, it's a machine. It's not intentional lying. It's just lying because of the structures behind it. So it's confabulating is a better word. It creates truths that don't exist. It creates probabilistic scenarios that look real but aren't. And that's okay. Like if you're speculating, if you're wargaming, if you're doing trade-offs, etc., that's really useful actually to help me as a strategist to think what could possibly be and what are the trade-offs. But we did an earlier show on how this can very quickly turn into this is the portrait of Dorian Gray. Like you are depending on this model to present some kind of truth back to you, and it lies persistently. I ran into this again this week, just creating static HTML pages. I said to Claude several times, Claude Code, where you're paying $200 a month, and probably that doesn't cover the cost, to be fair. But here are two sites that I have created, analyze them, and it misrepresented what was at the sites completely. And then I had to say, that is not what it says at those sites. And it says, oh, you're right. Sorry. And it told me this. I used a cheaper model. This is interesting. I used a cheaper model to analyze those sites, and that cheaper model hallucinated. Right?
Yep.
And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? And you're right. This gets me triggered. You can play whatever triggered GIF or video you have. But this is a fundamental limitation of these models. And as far as I can see, whether it's 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, or Mythos, or whatever's coming, this has not been solved. And I think this will arise later in some of our topics. It's a black box. This is the problem. That the people making it don't know what it is actually doing. And Judea Pearl, the godfather of neural networks and causal models, has always said this is a problem. That we don't know how they're working. It's a black box.
Yep.
Which means if you're using it in an ER, go harken back to that Harvard model, we don't know why it's even outperforming an ER doctor or a internal physician. We don't know why. That's a problem. Because they're probabilistic, what if the next time they don't outperform? And that's in the ER. And it's just a random outcome, a stochastic outcome. So yeah, you can hear I'm a bit triggered by this. When you need it for deterministic tasks, which means if you do X, you get Y. And it turns out that you don't get Y. And then you don't even know why you didn't get Y because it lies to you about what X was. Jason, you said perform X. I didn't really do X. Sorry.
Yep.
I did something like Z or A.
Yeah, we talked about it last week with Scout, making the mistake of hallucinating and shooting the wrong person. And then it's on second view.
Let's try again.
Try again. Sorry about that. I found it was very strange that Claude hallucinated on what article it decided to read and tell me about. Like, it wasn't anything that I had ever prompted it for. It just pulled an article out of seemingly thin air and told me about it.
Well, we'll take it. And this is the scary part. Everybody who's vibe coding their ass off right now.
Yeah.
Are you checking?
They're not. No.
That's a big ass problem. And I think that's a business opportunity, by the way, on the other side, to mop up all the bullshit that we're releasing right now because we're not checking and we don't care to. Because the whole vibe right now is just get it out there, just execute, just throw it out there on the market. Well, legal liability is going to call your card at some point.
Well, it was like the authors of that paper. They created I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a benchmark essentially that measured hallucinations with sources. So, they'll essentially have to be a checker for everything.
I think so. And we're placing that bet that you need verification audit. It's easier to verify and audit facts. Like, this is what Homer wrote. It is way more difficult to speculate. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are taking the opinion and the speculation as that's real.
Hey, you've just watched a clip from Show Your Priors podcast. Check out our main channel for full episodes. We have a new one every Tuesday. If you liked what you saw, give us a like and subscribe. It's free for you and helps us out a ton. Did we miss something during our discussions? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.